Angelo Carusone. Angelo is the CEO and president of Media Matters, which is a nonprofit organization and the United States' premier media watchdog. They watch all the Fox News clips, so you don't have to, and then they get you the best bits. So Angelo, how are you? How's it going?
I'm good, thanks for having me.
Hanging in there?
Yeah, we're holding together. I mean, I'm in DC, so it's like especially tense here right now.
Wow, yeah, I can imagine. Obviously, a lot of news happened. There was that thing that happened last week in DC. I want to ask first about your reaction to Twitter and Facebook banning Donald Trump.
Well, I think any kind of action against him was long overdue, and it's appropriate, right? Even though. Now once that's said, when you start to get into the nuts and bolts of it, they didn't enforce any rules against him for as long as he was on the platforms. And so it always kind of feels a little arbitrary and out of nowhere. That's the first. I always wonder about what does that mean for the future for similar kinds of crackdowns. But at its core, it's an extremely appropriate action. I mean, he violated their rules on such a regular basis. So at its core, appropriate, long overdue. The thing that strikes me though is, while Twitter did make it a ban, Facebook kind of pulled a sleight of hand. They said that he was definitely suspended for 2 weeks, but it is not a permanent ban. They have been actually pretty insistent on refusing to commit to that. All they keep saying is that it's an undetermined amount of time, and which tells me that they're hoping eventually the pressure dials down and everybody kind of moves on, and then Facebook could become sort of the center of gravity for Trump's rage posting.
And you mentioned it briefly, but what is your reaction to people who are skeptical of something like the Trump ban, meaning that how are these standards kind of applied on a principled basis? Like, will there be blowback for progressive activists or people who support BDS or something like that? How do you respond to that kind of thinking about whether we are giving sort of tech billionaires too much power over our discourse?
And they have a lot of power already, but I think it's a really fair concern. And I think the way that there's sort of two ways that we can check it. One is, a while ago, about 2 years ago, when they started to crack down on what they found to be a lot of the fake news sites that were involved in the 2016 election. The thing that really struck me about that crackdown, because at its surface everybody thought it was a good thing, was that the two groups that were disproportionately affected by it, this is back in 2017, were Facebook groups that focused on accountability for police, and a lot of Black activist Facebook groups, in particular Black women. Were disproportionately targeted in that purge. And so that actually reinforces the concerns, right? The one thing that was missing though, as a check on that, was that there was so little awareness across the board within the news media, within the public, about what that crackdown actually meant. And people sort of bought Facebook's PR spin, that they had done a really good job of cleansing their system from bad things. So I think one actually relies on us and the media to be more mindful about these things, right? Because they are sensitive to public pressure. I think the second check is, in this case, there was no new rule that was created. In fact, the single biggest rule, that at least in Facebook's terms and Twitter, they had just finally decided to enforce their incitement policy. Trump first called for a revolution after the 2012 election. I would just remind everybody, it's not his first time trying to overturn an election. It's actually Facebook has this thing called the public figure exception. And what that basically means is that a public figure can do and say anything they want, even against their rules, and they won't enforce anything against them. So all Facebook did was say that in this circumstance, they're not going to apply their public figure exception rule. And I would be fine with that if that was more universal, not less. So I think it's a real concern. I will say I'm mindful of that. And I think that's actually something that all of us have to be the check for, because alternatively, there is no other check.
Yeah, I mean, my former colleague at Fusion is a guy named Kevin Roos, who's now at the New York Times, and he every day on Twitter he just posts like the top 10 posts on Facebook, and they're just like the most insane right-wing things you can ever imagine. So, on the one hand, there's that. I mean, because the internet has sort of been taken over by these basically private tight corporate mega corporations, right? It's no longer this kind of open place. It's really like these private mega corporations built on top of it. And on the one, we can't have a situation like that where like the top 10 posts on Facebook are these insane right-wing things. But also like having Mark Zuckerberg decide what is okay and what is not okay seems problematic to me. I think the what's always left out of this conversation is what the role of public policy is. And like I think that you can track a lot of the work that you do at Media Matters to the repeal of the fairness doctrine in the 1980s, and that's what gave rise to right-wing TV stations like Fox. So like begging the tech oligarchs to handle our democracy seems problematic to me, and we don't. I'm certainly not smart enough to understand what the best way to design a public policy for this kind of thing is. But it seems to me like the only solution, something that at least we have some role in as citizens.
Yeah, I think you're dead right, and I've so internalized the brokenness of our politics that when asked about solutions, I don't even put that on the table. And that's not because it's actually, you're dead right. It's just I've literally pushed that so far away because it feels like something so far away. But there are real simple solutions actually. I always use this example, which is try to go to Facebook and start a Facebook group. Where it's like, I love Marvel movies, and it's just a Facebook group where you post and upload the latest Marvel movie and watch it with your, a couple of thousand. But you would never be able to do that. Like that's because it's against, like, they would get cracked down on, right? There's all kinds of problems with that. They'd be facilitating copyright infringement. There's a framework that allows for individuals to get action. In this case, the companies. There's public policy framework if you push too much medical misinformation, right? I mean, they cracked down on all the toothpaste that was preventing COVID really fast because Facebook would have been liable for that because they were helping promote it. So it's interesting, there's a lot of simple public policy solutions too. There's some grand things that they need to do, but a simple one would just be to establish a quick duty of care that they have as it relates to this, to some of the promotion of disinformation. Even something as simple as, that if you're going to give, one of the things that really struck me is, at one point, they weighted the algorithm to depress Mother Jones because it was having higher reach and engagement than places like the Daily Wire, which is Ben Shapiro's publication. They literally tipped the scales in order to artificially manipulate what their algorithm was producing so that they didn't get right-wing blowback. That should easily be able to be regulated against the law, right? I mean, because that seems like consumer fraud to me. Even aside from the larger questions of broadcasting regulation, there are some really simple consumer pathways that I think are probably very quickly achievable that wouldn't get to the big, longer, huge structural changes in the landscape. And there obviously are some we have to grapple with in terms of their power over us. But I actually think are really fast and achievable and empower those that are most likely to act, which are state AGs.
And I want to ask you also about the role of television, because I used to work in television news. I think that in the current discourse, I mean, I'm not discounting the role of social media, but I think that it's probably overplayed to the actual nefarious role that television does. I mean, still the vast majority of Americans get the majority of their news from television. And I wonder what the future of the cable news companies is in a post-Trump era. You probably watched more Fox than anyone in America as the CEO of Media Matters. Where does Fox go post-Trump?
Two things. One, they kind of tipped their hands today. They just made an announcement that'll probably go into effect in a few days that they are cutting back 1 hour of their supposed hard news programming, and they're adding an additional hour of opinion programming. So that's an illustration that they're heading in the more Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity direction than in like the Bret Baier kind of liar, but not like doesn't want to set fires on things all the time direction. And so they've given us a clue that they are going to try to center themselves as the voice of the opposition, and sort of, and to your point, actually sort of seize that role. The part about Fox that I think is going to be really significant is, the dirty secret about Fox is just like sort of online, but they cheat. They don't need a single commercial. They're the only commercial media company in the world that does not need a single ad. If they had zero ads, they'd still have a 90% profit margin. That's because everybody that has cable pays them at least $2.50. They're the second most expensive channel in everybody's cable box after ESPN. So, they're renegotiating all their rates right now with the cable providers. I think that how much noise gets made is going to depend on what their revenue is, but ultimately Fox is going to get a lot worse. They're a meteor that's getting pretty close to hitting the surface right now, so they're probably at their most dangerous.
Oh, well, that's a terrifying thought to ponder.
Yeah.
More dangerous Fox News. Well, I think that's a great place to end it. Angela, thank you so much for joining us and the work you guys do at Media Matters.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.